So at this point, we are recording, and I will be now silencing everybody just for the introduction portion. I'll let you unmute yourself at a certain point as we start our discussion. First of all, it's really nice to see everybody. I've missed you all. I know hasn't been actually all that long, but it seems like a very long time. And I was concerned that when we came back in May that we would have all of our class with us. And the amazing thing is we not only have all of our class with us, but we have all of our class and then some. I will send out, Randy and I will send out to you tomorrow the finalized version of the class list. We've added a couple more since you received the past list. There are actually now 38 people in the class, which I believe is for us is a all-time high number. I don't think we've ever had 38 people in the class. So we may run out of screens at a certain point. I can accommodate 25 screens on my computer. So we'll see how many people we have with us today. But at any rate, thank you all for coming back. This is the final quarter of our course in the Book of Numbers. We will finish this course in 5 weeks, 5 Mondays, starting tonight, ending with the last Monday night in May. And when we finish that, we will have finished the Book of Numbers, and then I will tell you where we're going from here. All right. First of all, let's see. I don't see Jay and Esther on the line, but let me make a comment. I had the opportunity this past week of going to the bat mitzvah of Jay and Esther, Hodis's granddaughter, Rachel. She did a magnificent job. I can tell you that I have rarely seen a bat mitzvah or bar mitzvah for that matter do as beautiful a job as Rachel did. She read all 7 of the aliyot from the Torah. She did the service, both the morning service, the Musaf service, the Torah service. She delivered a beautiful speech. It was one of the most remarkable young people I've seen in terms of, just handling everything and handling it so very easily. So I want to extend, and maybe I'll mention it to them when they come on again. Just want to say to Jay and Esther and to all of the Hodis and the Bush family, a big mazel tov on Rachel's bat mitzvah. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. As we begin tonight, too, I want to make mention of the fact that last week, the end of the week, we lost a famous rabbi in the Jewish community. His name was Harold Kushner. No doubt some of you have had the chance to see in the news or read about the information about Rabbi Kushner. He is a remarkable man. He was a conservative rabbi, spent most of his rabbinate in his congregation just outside the Boston area in Massachusetts. He was famous as a rabbi. He was famous as a writer, wrote 14 books over the course of his career, many of them bestsellers. I mean, one of the amazing things about Rabbi Kushner's book is a lot of rabbis write books, but most of them don't have much circulation, maybe, thousands, maybe tens of thousands. Rabbi Kushner's books were national bestsellers. He became prominent as a theologian. Those of you who don't know the name Rabbi Harold Kushner probably will know him if I tell you that the book he wrote, which became a standard book to refer people to in the 80s and 90s and the early 2000s, he wrote a book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People. And those of you who know about Rabbi Kushner's personal story, he and his wife had a son named Aaron. When Aaron was about 3 years old, he was diagnosed with a terrible disease called progeria, which is a disease in which a young person ages very, very quickly. Aaron aged over the course of the 14 years of his life. He was the equivalent of about a 60, 70-year-old when he died. And the tragedy was that no one knew at the time that Aaron had progeria. And of course, when he died at the age of 14, Rabbi Kushner decided to remember him and to remember his life by writing this very, very important book called When Bad Things Happen to Good People, which basically states a very interesting thesis. When you suffer bereavement, when you suffer death, one of the questions you often are faced with is, why did God do this to me? Why did I and my family have to suffer from this terrible tragedy? Rabbi Kushner said that God is not responsible for the tragedies that occur in our life. And he was referring not just to the disease that took his son, but he was also referring to other kinds of things that take place in the course of a life, accidents, other events that are unforeseen. When we lose people who are significant to us, and we ask the question, why did God do this? Was the death of my loved one a judgment upon me or upon my family by God? Rabbi Kushner answered, absolutely not. He said, God is the force that makes for good and for beauty and blessing in the world. Did he acknowledge that tragedy happens? Yes, he said tragedy happens. People die of all kinds of things, diseases, accidents, whatnot. But that is not a judgment from God. God does not cause people to die or to suffer because of their actions. And one of the things Rabbi Kushner tried to stress in this beautiful, beautiful book was that Aaron's disease and what he went through was not a punishment by God, was not a visitation by God, that God is not the one who is responsible for the terrible things that happen to us in life. That, according to Rabbi Kushner, is just part of the process of life itself. It is part of the law of living in this world and the events that happen. God, Rabbi Kushner said, it gives us the strength to bear the tragedies that we face in life. It wasn't Aaron's illness that was decreed by God, but God gave Rabbi Kushner and his family and people around Aaron the strength to deal with the tragedy that they faced and to overcome it and to surmount it. Now, some of you probably in your own lives have read When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It used to be the standard book that I would give when people would say, I'm dealing now with the sickness, the illness, the travail of a loved one. How do I understand it? Is this God's judgment? What is God trying to tell me? I often recommend Rabbi Kushner's book. While I disagree with some of what he has to say, I do agree with his general premise, which is that God is not judging us in the events of our life, which we face that are tragic, that God is behind the scenes, standing with us, consoling us and giving us the strength to face these tragedies and to surmount them. So Rabbi Kushner died. He was 88 years old. There are many, many rabbis who probably spoke about him this past Shabbat. I was mentioning earlier, Jay and Esther, I gave a mazel tov, a shout out to your granddaughter, to Rachel, and the beautiful bat mitzvah. But the rabbi at the services at the synagogue spoke very lovingly and very movingly of Rabbi Kushner. And he said a lot of what all of us are thinking, that this was a man who spoke to the needs of the time, who dealt with an issue that bothered so many Jews and provided guidance and support and direction for those of us who face tragedy to help us explain it. So I hope that addresses it somewhat. You can look up, there are lots of articles that were written the end of last week, the beginning of this week, about Rabbi Kushner. You can see some of his remarkable life. He was a very well-known rabbi, and we in the Jewish community have suffered a great loss with his passing. He was 88 years old when he died, and he served his congregation outside of Boston for about 24 years. He was a pulpit rabbi for a long period of time, and his writings reflect his experience. Having talked about Rabbi Kushner and talked about the past, I remind you that we are gathering together again after a rather long absence. We finished our last course in the book of Numbers a little while ago. And then I decided we were going to take a little break, a little vacation. So I told you that we would come back and we would resume the course in May. And that's what we are going to do. These next 5 weeks are all devoted to continuing with and to coming to really the end of studying up until the end of the book of numbers. So I invite you to join with us. Hopefully you have all received several pieces of information. Number one, hopefully you all got a reading list. If you didn't receive a reading list, just let me know. But this is 5 sessions. Tonight we're going to start session 1 called The Rite of the Red Heifer, and we will continue for 5 weeks. The only books you will need for this course are 2 books. You will need a Chumash. You can use any Chumash you want, any Torah text you want. The one that I use, the one that many of you have, is the version by Art Scroll, the Art Scroll Chumash. But don't worry about that, whether you use Art Scroll or another Chumash. I will always give you the pages or the chapters and verses to refer to. The only other text that you need for this course is Rabbi Sachs's book, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, wrote a series of 5 books on the 5 major books of the Torah. He called it Covenant and Conversation, and we are in book number 4, which is the book of Numbers. So if you have that, all of the reading assignments which are contained on the list refer to the chapters that we're going to cover in the book of Numbers each week and the relevant chapters that you should read or pages you should read in Rabbi Kushner's book. If you don't have the book and you need to get a copy, just text me through the Learning House and I'll tell you how to quickly obtain a copy of it, but hopefully most of you have it. One word about reading. Reading in this course is very, very important. Not important because I'm going to give you tests, because none of you will ever be tested. I will never give any of you a test. And I'm never going to put you on the spot. You'll talk if you want to say something, if you have something to contribute. I encourage you to join in. A lot of our conversation has to do with your opinions about the material that we are reading. But if you don't read the material, if you don't read the text itself, and if you don't read Rabbi Sachs's texts that deal with the book, you will probably not understand the material as clearly as if you do. And I would urge you to read the assignment before each week's lesson. So hopefully all of you have read Numbers chapter 19:1 to 20:29, have already read that. And you have read the brief articles that I've assigned in Rabbi Sachs's book. If you've done that, you're prepared for today's discussion. And that's good, because I hate to be the one who's talking all the time. And I hate when I ask a question to have people stare at me and look at me as though I asked something that they have no idea what I'm talking about. So if you've read the material and you're familiar with it, you'll be able to participate. I won't be constantly talking, and we will all get much more out of the text. Having said all that, I think it is really important to remind us where we have come from. Since we've been gone for a while, let me tell you where we've come from. We have gone through Jewish history from creation up until this moment now. So let me review for you very quickly, I'll do this in 3 minutes, all of Jewish history, or all of the history of the world in 3 minutes. We began our studies with the book of Genesis, and the book of Genesis began with God's creation of the world. He creates the world in 6 days. He rests on the 7th day. And following the story of creation, we learned about the early generations of humanity, starting with Adam and Eve, continuing with their children, Cain and Abel, going down quickly through the first 10 generations and ending with the story of Noah and Noah's family. And you'll remember that by the time we get to Noah, 10 generations after Adam and Eve, the world has so corrupted itself, has become so full of violence and evil, that God regrets that he has created the world, and he decides he will destroy it and begin again. After God makes this decision, he tells Noah to build an ark, a boat, and to work on the construction of it, and to warn people that if they do not change their ways, God is going to cause a terrible flood to befall the earth. People come, they see what Noah is doing, he warns them, they ignore him. And so finally, when the ark is completed and Noah and his sons and 2 of every animal get on board the ark, people see him, think he's crazy, but then no sooner do they board the ark when the rains begin to fall, the water that's in the deep open up, and as we know, the world is completely inundated, and all creatures of the earth, man and beast, die except for those who are aboard the ark with Noah and his family. Now, when the flood is over, Noah and his family begin the story of the world once again. They continue the story of the world. God enters a covenant with them, and he tries again to create a world in which mankind will serve as conservers and as watchmen over his world. It goes on for 10 generations. Ultimately, it doesn't prove successful. And God decides at the end of 20 generations from the creation of Adam to select one group of people and enter into a special relationship with them. The person he selects is a man called Abraham. He selects Abraham, then he selects Abraham's son Isaac, then he selects Isaac's son Jacob. He appoints the patriarchs, the heads of the Jewish people, and the matriarchs, their wives. And we begin to get in the rest of the book of Genesis, the stories of the generations from Abraham all the way through Isaac and Jacob into Jacob's 12 children of Israel. And when we finish the book of Exodus, which is the first book we read, we come to the story of how Jacob and his family, his 12 sons, come down to Egypt. They settle in Egypt. They live there all throughout the days of Joseph, who becomes a powerful man in Egypt. And that's where the book of Genesis ends. And then comes the book of Exodus. And you'll remember what happens. After Joseph dies, after the generation of Joseph's brothers die, a new Pharaoh, a new leader in Egypt arises who has no remembrance or no recollection or no gratitude for what Joseph did for Egypt. And he immediately begins to subjugate, to enslave the Jewish people. And for 210 years, the Jewish people who had come to Egypt as guests, as sojourners, become slaves in Egypt. And for 210 years, they've grown under their slavery. They despair of all hope. They cry out to God. God hears their cry. And at the end of this period of 210 years of servitude, God raises up a deliverer, a man by the name of Moses. And God says to Moses in a vision, "You, Moses, are a part of the Jewish people, and you will be my messenger. You will be my prophet. You will go to Pharaoh and you will deliver to him the final message, the warning that I want to stress to him. Tell him to release the Jewish people, to let the Jewish people go. They're not his people. They belong to me. God says they're my people. Tell Pharaoh to release them that they may serve me in the wilderness." Well, of course, Moses comes to Pharaoh. He delivers the message. Pharaoh is not willing to listen to the message. He refuses to heed Moses's words. And what happens? Moses says, if you fail to let the people go, God will bring you to the point where you will agree to that. It will be through a series of plagues that will befall the land of Egypt. And over a period of 9 months, Moses warns Pharaoh, and 10 plagues befall the Egyptians, until by the time of the 10th plague, the final plague, the death of the firstborn in Egypt, finally, Pharaoh says to Moses, "I've had enough. Take your people, take your wives, take your children, take your cattle, and do what you want. Just leave Egypt, go and worship your God. And when you meet him in the wilderness, when you see him, pray for me too." So Moses takes the Jewish people out of Egypt. It happens on Passover. Remember, we just celebrated Passover recently. We celebrated it the beginning of the month of April. On the first day of Passover, the Jewish people leave Egypt. They travel from Egypt through the wilderness. They travel to Mount Sinai. It takes them 50 days. They get there on the holiday of Shavuot. Just so you know what we're talking about here, Shavuot is going to occur the end of this month. So between when Passover was a month ago and Shavuot, when Shavuot comes the end of this month, not even 2 months, not even 8 weeks, about 7 weeks. That was the time between the Jewish people leaving Egypt and wandering in the wilderness and finally coming to Mount Sinai. And you'll remember that at Mount Sinai, the Jewish people come to the base of the mountain. God appears to the nation, and in a revelation to the Jewish people says, "I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Now, Israel, you have a choice. I freed you from being servants to Pharaoh. I now ask you, will you be my servants? Will you be servants to me? Will you serve God?" And you'll remember that very memorable event that there at Sinai on that day, the people of Israel unite together and they say in one voice in response to God's question, will you accept me and will you accept my Torah? The Jewish people say, Na'aseh v'nishma. We will do everything you tell us to do and we will seek to understand and to fulfill it. So everything looks wonderful, okay? Of course, no sooner the people say this and Moses goes up to the mountain to receive the 10 commandments. What happens? Moses is gone for 50 days. The people begin to wonder, what happened to Moses? Where's the prophet of God? Who will lead us? How will we know what God wants? They panic and they turn to Moses' brother Aaron. Aaron has remained with them while Moses has gone to the top of the mountain. And the people say to Aaron, what happened to Moses, our leader? He's gone. We don't know what to do. We don't know what God wants of us. We need an intermediary. We need someone to reveal to us what God wants. And they demand of Aaron that he makes them a representation of God. I won't say an idol, but essentially to make a physical representation of God. Aaron reluctantly agrees to do it. He doesn't want rebellion in the camp. He makes for the people what they ask for. He asks for donations of gold, of jewelry. They bring it to him. He fashions a egel hazahav, a golden calf. He says to the people, this is your representative. Now, this will represent to you the God of Israel. Serve him. Jewish people, of course, go crazy. They serve the golden calf. They forget that it's merely a representation of the God of Israel. And to make a long story short, Moses, at the end of 50 days, is told by God, go back down. Your people have violated my covenant with me. They have already turned away. They who accepted my commandments, who accepted that I'm God, the only God, they've already turned away Moses, and they're now back in the camp while you're up here in the mountain and they're worshiping a golden calf. And I'm going to destroy them, God says. I can't bear with this people. They're too fickle. They're too they're unsteady. They're uncertain. I can't make a covenant with them. I'm going to wipe them out. And Moses says, no, God, please don't wipe them out. Remember that they're just recently come from slavery. They're afraid. And finally, Moses convinces God to spare the people, not to wipe them out. Moses goes back down to the mountain, sees the people worshiping the calf, takes the 10 commandments, which he has received from the top of Mount Sinai, takes it and throws it against the base of the mountain, shatters the tablets, and then gets angry and punishes the Jewish people for turning away so quickly in the period of 50 days, from turning away from following after God, for being unfaithful. And the Jewish people repent and they're sorry. We're sorry, Moses, we did this. Please, can we be restored to God's favor? Moses says, let me talk to God. He goes back up to God. He's already secured from God the assurance that the people won't be destroyed, but Moses wants something more. He says to God, when you brought this people out of Egypt, you agreed to lead them and to take them into the land that you promised them, the land of Canaan, the land of their forefathers, the land of Israel. The people want you to go, God. They want you to be with them. They don't want you to know that they can go themselves. If you don't go with them, if you don't join them on the journey, if you do not remain with us and with your people who you freed, then your people do not want to go further. And furthermore, if you're not going to go with them, then I'm not going to go with them either. If you're not going to go, then I don't want to be part of this either. Moses essentially says to God, if you are faithful to your people, not only must you forgive their sin of making this egel hazahab, but you must agree to join with them and continue with them and to go into bring them into the land along with your presence. God agrees. Okay, and that's the end of the book of Exodus. And what do we discover at the end of the book of Exodus? God says, so that the people should never think I'm not with them. He says to Moses, tell the people to build me this beautiful tabernacle, this beautiful sanctuary. Let the people build for me a dwelling place that I might dwell in the camp of Israel. And so what happens over the course of the next months, that first year, is that Moses tells the people to bring the items and whatnot. And they build a tabernacle. They build a sanctuary, a mikdash for God in their midst. Also during this period, Moses is teaching them Torah. What are the Jewish people doing? They spend the time in the wilderness, that first year in the wilderness, learning God's law, building God's house. So by the time we come to the end of the book of Exodus. 1 year has passed, okay? The people have been there for 1 year. They've repented. They've asked for forgiveness for the sin of making the golden calf. God has forgiven them. God has agreed to go with them. They have built a tabernacle, a sanctuary for God, so God may dwell in the midst of the people. And furthermore, at this sanctuary, God says, you will bring your offerings, which he tells them to bring. This will be the center of worship for the Jewish people. When you worship on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, periodically in the holidays, you will bring your offerings to the Mishkan, and there you will bring them to the priest, and there you will serve your God, and you will meet one another. Everything is well, okay? Let's see, I went over a few minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes. All right.
You said 3.
I said 3, so my wife is keeping me honest. All right, so at the end of that time, year passes, they dedicate the sanctuary, everything is good, they have a house of God now, they've studied God's law, they've studied Torah, the people are all ready, and God says, okay, you're ready to go into the land of Israel. This is where we began our course, just to remind you. God says, you've dwelt under Mount Sinai long enough. You have learned my law, you know what I expect of you. Therefore, the time has come for you to go ahead and to continue your journey to the land of Israel, and I will go with you. And when you get there, you will proceed to enter the land and conquer it and take possession, and I will have fulfilled my promise that I made to your ancestors, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will bring you into the land of your ancestors. I will bring you to your inheritance. People are ecstatic, okay? And that's where the book of Numbers began. Remember, we read about preparations. They had to prepare for the trip. They prepared the camp, how they dwelt in the camp, where they lived, how they traveled, which tribes traveled first, which traveled next. They set up all of the rules that they needed to follow. Now that they were ready to go, now that they were ready to enter the land, God gives them all of the preparatory steps they have to take in order to be able to go in and do what they intend to do. They march, they follow God's orders, they come to the very borders of the land of Israel. This is where we almost left off last time. They get to the borders and God says, okay, now this is it. You have your instructions, you have all your preparations, may go and conquer the land. The Jewish people become scared, okay? They become scared, they don't want to go in, they don't want to conquer the land. They say to Moses, maybe it would be a better idea if we sent in scouts to scout out the land first. Let's send in scouts and see what the land is like. I know God promised it was a good land and it was bountiful and that we would conquer it, but it doesn't hurt to send in some scouts just to make sure. Moses listens to their idea, consults with God, decides it's a good idea. So he picks 12 men, one from each of the major tribes of Israel, and he says to them, go into the land, scout it out, and bring back word. Go there for 40 days. Go from one part of the land, from the south to the north, and then back again, and bring back word. Is this land the land that God has promised? At the end of 40 days, the scouts return. They come back to Moses and the people in the camp, and they give a message. They say, yeah, it's a good land. Absolutely. It's a land flowing with milk and honey, and it's marvelous fruits, and everything that God says is certainly true. It is a bountiful land, that it's a land certainly worthy of inheriting. But they say, we have a little problem. As we pass through the land, we notice the people, we notice the villages and the towns that they had built, and we're never going to be able to conquer this, Moses. We're not enough. We can't do this. Despite the fact that God had promised we can, despite the fact that God defeated Egypt, the greatest country in the world for us, now that we have to go in and conquer the land and we're supposed to do this ourselves, we can't do this ourselves, Moses. It's not possible. We're going to get killed. We're going to be decimated. And then they're going to take our wives and children captive. And the people are so frightened when they hear the report of the scouts that they say to Moses, why did you bring us out here to die at the hands of these nations? They take another vote amongst themselves and they say, let's go back to Egypt. Let's appoint new leaders and let's go back to where we came from. It's better for us to go back to Egypt than to die in the wilderness, to die trying to take the land. Well, Moses, of course, is completely crestfallen. Two of the spies attempt to stop the revolt. They say to the people, no, no, don't do this. God has promised that he will be with you. You have seen how he has taken care of you over the last year. You have seen how he has defeated Egypt. Do not falter now. God has promised he will be with you. Go in and it will all go well. But the people say, absolutely not. They get so frustrated with Joshua and Caleb, the two faithful scouts, that they are ready to stone them. And finally, they say, finally, Moses doesn't know what to do, and God suddenly appears. And God is now angry. And he says to Moses, I cannot deal with this people any longer. After all I've done, they still don't trust me. They still don't believe in me. Now, when it comes time for them to do something for themselves, they prove unready to do it. Moses, this is what's going to happen. I won't forsake the people, but this entire generation, the generation of those who were 20 years and older at the time of the Exodus, they're all going to die in the wilderness. Not one of them will come into the land. Now they don't have a choice anymore. I'm not telling them to go into the land. I'm telling you, they're not going into the land. Every one of the men who was 20 years of age or older, they will die out in the wilderness, and only their children, those who were younger than 20, them I will take into the land after the previous generation dies. Moses delivers the word to the people. They immediately realize they've done a terrible thing. They beg for forgiveness. Moses says, no, God has made this judgment. The people decide they're going to go into the land anyway. They try. It's a disaster. And then they begin their 39 more years of wandering in the wilderness. And because the people are so disheartened, they attempt to rebel against Moses. They're so unhappy that they're not going into the land that there is even a rebellion. I think you remember at the last part of our last session, the people decide to pick new leaders. Moses hasn't brought us into the land. Moses hasn't done what he said he was going to do. He hasn't fulfilled the promise to restore us to the land, even though it was our fault. And the people say, let us appoint new leadership. There's a rebellion. A man called Korach, other rebels rise up. They rise up against Moses, and of course, the rebellion is put down. Now, that was where we left off last time. And
16 minutes.
My wife says 16 minutes. All right.
Instead of 3.
It's instead of 3. So where are we now? We are now about to read the continuation of the story, but something very interesting happens between the portion that we left off, the Korach rebellion, and where we're going to start today. You may not have noticed it because the Torah doesn't single it, but something very intriguing happens between the last Torah portion, Korach, and the Torah portion that we begin today. Does anybody know what has happened between the last Torah portion and this Torah portion? And now you can unmute yourself if you would like. Anybody? Okay, Jerry, go ahead.
Is it the death of Miriam?
Well, it's more than just the death of Miriam. It's the end of the 40 years. Yes, but you're right. 40 years pass. You're going to say, well, what happened during those 40 years? What happened during all the rest of the years of wandering? Torah says, don't care. They wandered. People lived, they died out. The Torah only tells us what we need to know. So from last week's portion to this week's portion, 39 years have passed. What you don't realize when you read this portion is the scene darkens. We pick up the scene again. It's 39 years later. 39 years have passed. And now it is the end of the generation. It is the end of the 39 years. We have come to the end of the story. Miriam dies. You're right, Jerry. Aaron is going to die in this week's portion too. Moses is told he's going to die too. Why are they going to die? Because they're all part of the old generation. None of the men who were older than 20 years of age will make it into the land except for Joshua and Caleb. Everyone else will die out. And as a matter of fact, as we start the portion today, the generation has gone. Miriam's death is the signal that the generation is over. All right. So what does that mean? It's a pretty sad story, right? The generation of the Exodus is now gone. Their children are still there. The women are still there. Their wives are still there. The people they're worried about, but they're all now gone. And therefore, the Torah has to deal with the end of the story, because now we have to deal with the end of the story of the wanderer. We are now in year 40, or the 39 to 40. We're in the final year of the story. Now, the Torah portion begins with a very interesting description. I'm not going to read it to you. It's called the Rite of the Red Heifer. Did all of you read the Rite of the Red Heifer? Okay. All right. This is the part where I get a lot. You're going to say, Rabbi, I don't understand what the Rite of the Red Heifer is. And I would explain it to you, but it's not important that you understand it now. The truth of the matter is no one understood it. Even the wisest man in Jewish tradition, who was according to Jewish history, was Solomon. King Solomon said, I've studied many, many mysteries. I've studied all of God's law and all of the Torah, and I understand everything, but I don't understand this. This doesn't make any sense to me. If Solomon, the greatest, the wisest man of the world, didn't understand the rights to the red heifer, don't think that you're going to understand them either. But let us at least talk about what it is, not to understand it. What was someone tell me in a couple of sentences what this ritual of the red heifer is all about? Anybody want to try? Go ahead, Lori. Oh, okay.
Well, apparently, Rabbi Sachs had talked about the symbolism of the red heifer on page 242, and that it represents like life in its most primal form because it's an animal, it doesn't have consciousness of death, and because it's red, it symbolizes blood, which, you know, for the Torah represents life itself. And the animal, it's an animal on which a yoke has not yet come. I don't understand that. But it's supposed to have been killed and burned and reduced to ash. Correct. To symbolize the enactment of death.
All right, but what?
I don't understand. I mean, I read it. All right, but I don't understand. Like, what was the point?
You are right about the fact that it is connected with the idea of death. What was the ritual of the red heifer designed? Randy, go ahead. You can put your face into.
Okay, well, I'm not going to face in, but it has to do with cleansing you. It's a cleansing issue, cleansing process after you have been in contact with death, with people who have died.
If you come in contact with a human corpse, if you come in contact with a human being who has died.
I'm sorry, and I still don't understand it either.
Okay, okay. It is a rite of purification. Okay, purification. Here's the rule. You know that if you're impure, you have to go through rites of purification. The most serious kind of contamination that a human being can contract is contact with a human corpse. Okay. Now, I won't go into why that's true, but it is true. In Judaism, the most serious defilement that a human being can have is contact with a dead human body. And for most of us, most of you, I'm looking at you here, you're looking at me like I'm crazy. But unless you're a rabbi, probably most of you have not really had direct contact with it. Go ahead, Lori, go ahead.
Is that why, like, after we've come from the cemetery and before we enter the home, we have to wash our hands? Like, yes. Like we put the water in, is that why we do that?
When you enter a cemetery, which is not contact with the dead itself, it's just merely being in a place where the dead are buried, you cannot return, forget the temple. You can't return to the temple at all. But even before you go into your house, those of you who've ever been to a Jewish funeral know that after the burial of the deceased, there is at the cemetery, and if you don't do it at the cemetery, you can do it outside the door to the home that you go to. There is water, a basin, you pour water over your hands, and symbolically you purify yourself, or you attempt to purify yourself after having been in cemetery grounds. So even being present in a cemetery is contaminating, but to be actually in the presence of the deceased, and I don't know if any of you have, to have been present when a person dies and be there after life has left the person, it is the experience that, thank heavens, most of us don't have. I mean, you may after death, you know, there's the body, but for most of us aren't present when death occurs. But if you saw a person die and you were within a physical space where the person died, you would contact this very serious this very serious contamination caused by presence with the dead. Okay. In order to purify yourself, in order to go back to the temple, once you've made contact with the dead, you cannot return to the tabernacle unless you purify yourself. And that's what this red heifer rite is about. You have to take a red heifer, whatever that is, you have to burn it, you have to gather its ashes, you have to take these ashes, dissolve it in water with other ingredients, and then you have to take this solution and you have to sprinkle it on anyone who has come in contact with the dead. Okay. And lo and behold, if you make contact with the dead and they sprinkle on you the waters of the red heifer, guess what happens to you? You're purified. You're whole again. You can go back to the sanctuary. But everybody who has anything to do with preparing the red heifer, those who gather the animal, who burn it, who gather its ashes, who mix it with the water, anybody connected with this ceremony becomes impure. So while the waters will purify those who have made contact with the dead, everybody else who comes in contact with the ashes have to go through purification. Go ahead, Lori.
Well, who decided this? I mean, is this a thing that God said you need the red heifer, or like how did this like happen?
Yeah.
How did they
Yeah.
decide on
No,
this as opposed to some other animal?
Okay, it's right at the beginning. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, "This is the degree of the Torah which God has commanded, which I have commanded." God says now, Moses, one last thing I've got to take care of. Okay, one thing I want to teach you: those who have become impure through contact with the corpse of a human being must be purified through this ritual of the red heifer. And this is a ritual, and this is how it is done. And the very strange thing about it is that while the waters that are prepared will purify those who have had contact with a dead body, everyone else connected with the ceremony of preparing the ashes will become unclean and will have to go through other purification rites themselves. Now, here's my question to you. Why does the Torah talk about this now? Why is the Torah talking about this very strange law? This chapter 19 is not connected with anything we've read before, and it's not connected with what's going to come in the next chapter, chapter 20. It's completely into what is going on. Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, I'll hazard this, that taking a clue from you that this was the 40th year. We've got the death of Miriam, the death of Aaron, and soon the death of Moses. But even more so, it's the death of that generation of Israel. So they've all come in contact, in effect, with death.
They've all come in contact with death. In its essence, at the end of the period of the 40 years, the entire community has come into contact with death, because in most cases, there was someone in your family, a man probably, who died and you came into contact with them. So theoretically, everybody is impure. Everybody is impure. The reason that we are dealing with this law now is because it is a warning to us. It is saying, now as you approach the land and must enter the land in a holy state, this is a warning to you that now death is a thing we're going to deal with. We are now going to deal with the subject of the death of a generation. The 40 years of people will have died. The last people who are going to die in this chapter are Miriam and Aaron, and Moses' death will be announced. So why do we have this whole business of the red heifer? Because since the Torah is going to deal with death, you might as well start by learning the laws about purification from contact with the dead. Okay? The last of the leaders is going to die. Now, the first of the leaders that we ever hear about among the people who are now going to die is Moses. He was a little boy. He was born, and he was born premature, and his parents decided to watch over him and protect him. And when they couldn't protect him anymore, they put him in a basket. What did they do? They sent him down the river in a basket, and they told his sister, Miriam, watch over, see what happens to your little brother, see if anyone finds him and protects him. Miriam watches him. She sees Pharaoh's daughter find the baby, and Moses is saved, and Miriam intercedes with Pharaoh's daughter and arranges for the baby's mother, Moses' mother, to nurse him until he's old enough to be adopted into the royal household in Egypt. Miriam has been with Moses from the very beginning. She was there when he was a little boy, an infant, and his mother tried to save him. Now, just as they're coming to the end of the generation, this is where we come to chapter 20. Okay. The children of Israel, the whole assembly, arrived at the wilderness of Sin. And what is the first thing that happens? Miriam died and was buried there. What does it tell you? We're coming to the end of the journey. It's the end of the story. And now in the wilderness of Sin, which is right at the border of the land of Israel, we are told that Miriam, Moses' sister, the one who had watched over him literally from the time he was an infant until now, she dies. It's not fair. Miriam should have gotten to go in. Where's her reward? She wasn't one of the men. She wasn't one of those condemned to die in the wilderness. Moses is watching, and Aaron, his brother, is watching their sister Miriam die. Moses and Aaron are standing there, and they see Miriam, their sister, die and see her buried. And what must be going through Moses and Aaron's mind when they watch this? How would you feel if you were Moses and Aaron and you saw your sister Miriam die? How would you feel? Anybody?
Angry.
Angry. Okay. You'd feel angry. Why would you feel angry?
Because it wasn't fair.
Wasn't fair. My sister didn't do anything. She was a good person. She didn't refuse to go into the land. She didn't get us to wander for 39 more years. Why should she die? She should go into the land and get to see the reward. She's responsible for the exodus from Egypt. She saved, Moses said, she saved me. Why should she die? That's not fair. God, how can you do that? How can you kill my sister Miriam? The other people, people who rebelled, all right, that was your decree. But Miriam was my sister. Miriam watched over me. You're killing her now? Just on the eve of us going to in the land, when we're ready to go, when you take her life? How can that be fair? What does God say to Moses? Trick question. Nothing. He doesn't tell Moses anything. Miriam dies. Okay, go ahead, Joseph.
Yeah, I would think that Moses would be thinking, oh my gosh, there may not be exceptions for this, generation rule.
Yeah, well, first of all, you shouldn't have affected Miriam anyway, because it said the men who were over 20 at the time. So she should have been spared theoretically, because God didn't condemn the women to die. But Moses is beginning to think, oh my God. He thinks the end has come, but my sister should have been allowed to live. And since Moses and Aaron don't see themselves as having sinned against God, they didn't rebel. They probably assume that they should live too. Moses is probably thinking at this point, we're here, we're almost there. Aaron and Miriam and I, we're going to go into the land, and we're going to finally see the completion of our mission. Our task is completed. We've seen the promised land, and now we're going to go in. And just before they're going to go in, Miriam dies. And Moses and Aaron are not only sad because his sister who they've had the entire time of but their sister who should have gone in has died. Go ahead, Lori.
Do you think maybe it was because she was so connected with her brothers that she was sort of put on the same plane as them? I guess, because I
We
can't
don't know
fathom why she would be
why she died. All right.
sacrificed.
Well, you know about Miriam, first of all, that Miriam gossiped about her brother Moses. Those of you who were with me before know that Miriam wasn't an innocent. The one bad thing that Miriam did in her life was that during the years of the wilderness, when Moses was being challenged for leadership, Miriam and Aaron, Moses' sister and brother, also said, why should God make Moses a leader? We're also leaders. Why shouldn't God speak through us? So I could tell you, Lori, that maybe Miriam didn't deserve to live. Maybe because of her gossip, God finally decided to punish her. We already know that maybe Aaron doesn't deserve to live, because some of you said, well, wait a second, Aaron was the one who made the golden calf. So Aaron shouldn't get to go in, even though he never rebelled. He sinned, he made the golden calf. Miriam sinned by speaking Lashon Hara, speaking gossip about her younger brother. Okay, so we don't know why Miriam didn't go in. Go ahead, Lori, and then Joseph.
But like, why should she be punished for one thing? Because her entire life was devoted to protecting her brother. And then one thing should determine that her life ends. I don't agree with that.
No. Moses probably said the same thing. I'm using my words. God, she screwed up maybe one time. She spoke a little gossip, but you punished her. Why are you killing her now? It was a small sin. I forgave her. I said it was okay. I forgave her. You forgave her. You punished her and healed her. Why should she be punished for it? Good question, Lori. Go ahead, Joseph.
Well, when I read that part, I wasn't that shocked that Miriam died because all those people were dying. You know, they're old. They've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. So I didn't see it as a punishment that God's killing her. I just thought she's getting old like all the rest and they're all going now.
Very good. Rabbi Kushner, God didn't decree she died. She died because she was an old woman. She was older than Moses. Moses at this time is 119, almost 120 years old. His sister was older than her. Why did she die? She died because she was an old woman. You're going to blame God for that? And that's the whole idea. That's what Kushner says. Yes, God is responsible for the good things, but when people who are 123 years old or whatever she was die, don't blame. That's what happens. And Joseph is saying, when I read the story, I didn't see it as being a punishment. Yes, Moses wanted his sister to go into the land, but she was an old woman. She was 120, whatever she was. She was at least 3 or 4 years older than her brother Moses. He was 120 when he died, so she was 123, 124. So she dies. Okay. And Joseph, you had no problem. I mean, that would seem natural to you. But Moses has a problem because, like Lori, Moses is saying, she may have died because she was an old woman, but she shouldn't have died because she did so many good things. She should have gone into the land. She should have gotten to go in. She should not have been punished because the people grumbled and complained and God punished them for wandering for 39 years. If the people hadn't opened their big mouth and caused all these problems, we could have gone in 39 years ago and my sister would have enjoyed all those years in the land of Israel. My sister was cheated, okay? My sister Miriam was cheated because she had to suffer because the generation that could have gone in and complained and rebelled against God got a punishment that caused us to wander for 39 years. So Moses is saying, whose fault is it that Miriam died? Who does Moses blame? Anybody? Who does Moses blame? Anybody? Go ahead. Leslie, go ahead. Who does Moses blame?
God.
Not God.
No?
Not God. He blames some. God, yes, God punished the people by making them wander 39 more years. So yeah, God in a way, but who is really Moses really angry with?
The people.
Go ahead.
The people.
The people. These damn Israelites, these rebellious son of a guns, they caused all these problems. I tried to take them out. I tried to do a good thing for them. I did what God asked. I brought them to the boundaries of Israel. God said, everything is all right. Go in. It's all yours. And what did they do? They lose faith. They rebel against God. They want to go back to Egypt. And God, in his anger, gives them 39 more years of wandering. If it wasn't for these people, my sister would be alive. Go ahead, Craig.
Right. Yeah. Since this affects everybody, there had to be physicians of a sort in the group at the time that have this situation. I was involved. So literally everybody who's been in hospitals and dealt with this today, but there had to be physicians at that time. What held them off as being separate?
Very good. Craig's point is, weren't there physicians? We know that Judaism speaks about physicians, so we know that it does provide for physicians. Interestingly enough, Craig, this is the observation. If a person was 20 years old, meaning they were of that certain age when they left Egypt, and they wandered for 40 more years, okay, that means that people who were 60 years and older would have died, right? I don't know whether they died of natural causes, diseases, whether there were physicians were called, or whether just that whole generation of 20-year-olds after 40 more years, they just naturally died out. The implication of the Torah is that during this generation, that entire generation died out. I'm not sure there was an illness per se that could have been identified, that someone could have said, well, if they had known what this illness was, or if there was one particular thing that was killing them, maybe someone could have figured out what to do. Actually, this was foretold. God said they're going to wander for 40 years, and by the end of that 40 years, everyone who was 20 years old is going to die. Yes, go ahead, Craig.
Oh, I'm looking at it from a slightly different.
Oh, go ahead.
We've talked about sanctification. We've talked about watering, etc.
Mhm.
Today, this happens on a daily, hourly basis in hospitals. I've been there. I've been part of it. Certainly, it didn't happen when I was in a hospital or otherwise, probably out of ignorance, but it didn't matter. But there had to be people at that time who their job had some function. I mean, Maimonides was a doctor. There had to be individuals who were physicians who were treating people, and there had to be death. And there had to be death, whether it was in this group, before this group, or after the group. Even in people over 20, there were people that were part of it. The concept of sanctification could happen with anybody, but at the end of the day, these people seem to be part of it. And yet, I don't know how you sanctify people who deal with this problem on a daily basis. In the ICUs of the world, we deal with it every day.
Yeah. We have here also, Craig, the added difficulty that God himself kind of set this in motion when he said to Moses, they wandered for 40 years, and at the end of 40 years, they're gone. Randy?
Well, and because they wandered for 40 years and that particular generation was gone, God decided that he needs a new, younger group of people to go into the land, to be the leaders. And so Miriam she was part of that old, she was part of the old generation, the old group who wasn't going to bring forth any new ideas or any strength.
Yeah, I think that's true. And Craig, I think the amazing thing or the remarkable thing is the thought that everybody who was 20 years of age, all the men who were 20 years of age would die over the next 40 years. That's rather remarkable, because people don't necessarily even, there are people who would live longer. So the very fact is that these deaths, whatever cause of death, my assumption is that many of them were natural deaths. God arranged for it that this generation was going to die out, that all those people who were part of the rebellion, none of them was going to live to go into the land. So whatever the reason they died, whether it was natural causes, whether it was old age, some of them may have been older at any rate, and after 40 more years, they were gone. But whatever it is, by the time 40 years had passed, the last of the old generation was gone. Miriam represents one of the last of them. Moses is now angry. He is angry with the Jewish people, which helps to explain now what's coming. Take a look at what comes next.
Robert House, I have a question, please. I have a question.
Sure, go ahead, right ahead.
During the purification, was it only purification of the body, or it was also included a spiritual purification? Meaning, was it a prayer?
Yes,
Also,
it was a ritual, and but was, Sonia, a purification both of the body, but not just it was a body purification. By having the water sprinkled on you, it freed you from the contamination of contact with the dead. So yes, you are right. But it was also a spiritual exercise, because the sprinkling of the ashes was just symbolic of the inner purification that God was granting the whole person.
Was it a special prayer saying at that moment?
There was not an official prayer, no. There's no prayer that was stated. It was just that those who came in contact with the dead had to have water sprinkled on them. It doesn't mention any particular words that were said, but it was a ritual that was performed.
Thank you, Rabbi House.
You're welcome. All right. So now comes the interesting thing. Miriam has died. We are told she was died and she buried there. And then suddenly we are told out of nowhere, and suddenly there was no water for the assembly, and they protested against Moses and Aaron. Immediately upon Miriam's death, something that we haven't heard of happening for a long time, 39 years happens. Suddenly there's no water. Suddenly we're back in a situation where the Jewish people don't have water. There's a tradition that so long as Miriam was alive, God always provided watering places for them. There was always a source of water for the Jewish people as long as Miriam was alive. But when Miriam died, the Jewish people knew thirst again because there was no water. So what did the Jewish people do? It says the people quarreled with Moses and spoke up saying, if only we had perished as our brethren perished before the Lord. Why have you brought this entire congregation to the wilderness to die here? We and our animals. Why did you bring us from the land of Egypt? The people who survive now, who witness the death of Miriam, who suddenly have no water, what do they go and they do? What do? They return back to form. No water? Moses, what did you do to us? You brought us out to the wilderness. We're all going to die here on the verge of going into the land. Why did you do it? You were Moses. What would your reaction be to the people? How would you deal with the people? You were the leader of the Jewish people. What would you do, Leslie?
Well, you said that he was mad at them, so he called them, I don't know if he called them you rebels, but he called them
You rebels.
you rotten people, you.
He loses it. Moses does something he really has never done before. Moses has never lost faith in his people, even when God was theoretically angry. Even when God said to Moses, they built a calf, I'm going to destroy him. They did this, they deserve not to go on. Moses has always interceded for his people, right, Leslie? He has always said to God, God, wait a second, don't do this. And he's explained why God shouldn't do it, right? Finally, on the verge of coming into the land, his sister dies. They lose water. Suddenly the people complain again, the same complaint they had 40 years earlier, right? Why did you bring us out here to kill us? And Moses, Leslie, is angry. Okay? Now, what should Moses have done at this point? What should Moses have done if he was the old Moses we remember? What would the proper reaction have been? Leslie?
Well, God will take care of.
Go back to
Take care of
God
you.
and see what God, Moses' reaction would say, all right, let me see what God says. So look
But
what it
instead, he
says.
slammed the rock and yelled at them.
Yeah. He said, so what does Moses do? Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the congregation to the tent of meeting, to the place where God appears, and they fell on their knees. The glory of the Lord of Hashem appeared to them. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take the staff and gather together the assembly, you and Aaron, your brother. Speak to the rock before the people's eyes. In other words, in their presence, speak to the rock that it shall give its waters. And thus shall you bring forth water for them from the rock and give drink to the assembly of Israel and their animals. So Moses goes to God, Moses and Aaron. And God says, all right, Moses, I've heard the people complain and they're worried. They haven't been to face the water shortage in a lot of years. This is what you do. Take the rod that I gave you, the rod you did the miracles with. Go to the rock, speak to the rock and tell the rock to produce the water. The rock will produce the water. The people will drink. The animals will drink. It will all be fine. And when everybody's had a nice, cool drink, you all get to go into the land of Israel. Is that what Moses does? Is that what Moses does? Leslie, you're shaking your head.
No, he didn't speak. He slammed the rock with the staff.
Moses, okay, yeah, that is not what Moses does. It says, It says Moses took the staff from before the Lord. He took the staff that God told him to take, right? He has took the staff. He took the staff from before the Lord as the Lord had commanded him. Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and they said to them, so Moses takes the staff, he gathers the congregation together, they come to the rock, and then Moses doesn't do what God tells him. Okay, it says, Moses said to them, listen now, O rebels, shall we bring forth water from this rock? Okay, he doesn't just speak to the rock and say, produce the water. He says to the people, oh, you rebels, do you really want, am I now required to produce this water for you? Shall we produce this water from the rock? Then Moses raised his arm and struck the rock with his staff twice. He not only doesn't just speak to it, he takes the staff, which God told him to take, and he hits the rock 2 times with the staff, right? What are we told? Abundant water came forth, and the assembly and their animals drank. Okay? So you're going to say, well, Moses did essentially what God said. He took the staff. That's true. He assembled the people. That's what God wanted him to do. The only thing he didn't do was he didn't speak to the rock. He spoke to the people and said, oh, you rebels, shall we really bring forth water to you from this rock? And then he proceeds to hit the rock 2 times with the staff, and water comes forth. Now, God is immediately angry. The very next verse, listen to what it says. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you, both of you, will not bring this congregation to the land that I have given them. Okay? You, Moses, and you, Aaron, because you failed to sanctify me, because you failed to respond to the people in the way I told you, you're both now going to die too. Neither one of you will go in. Why? Anybody want to talk about why? Okay. Essentially, Moses has disobeyed God. He condemns the people. He calls them rebels. He strikes the rock instead of speaking to it. And he suggests that he and Aaron somehow are performing this miracle. Listen now, O rebels, shall we bring forth water to you from this rock? He doesn't speak to the rock and say, may God, the God of Israel, provide water from this rock, and the water comes forth. He says, you people, you rebels, are you really worthy that we, Aaron and I, should bring forth water from the rock? So there are so many things that you can say that Moses did wrong here. Let's list what did Moses do that was unforgivable? Anybody? Yeah, you got to understand this. Why does Moses now get kicked out of going into the land? What did he do? Go ahead, Jerry. And then let's see, who's that? Harvey. Yes.
Well, I feel for Moses because in understanding what you were indicating, Moses is thinking, hey, 40 years ago, if they would have listened to the 12 spies, my sister would be alive in the promised land. So, but Moses unfortunately failed, and which I probably would have failed too, to sanctify God and honor God.
Yeah. Moses is usually very simple. Moses comes to God. God, what do we do? God tells Moses what to do. And Moses, the faithful servant, goes out and does exactly what God tells him to do. It is very out of character, Jerry, you're right, for Moses to receive explicit orders from God and then to go out and do his own thing. But I am also sympathetic with Moses. I understand what caused him to be. It's clearly he was angry. The fact that he calls the people rebels, the fact that he blames the new generation, the young people, he treats them as if they're like their fathers from 40 years before. The fact that he strikes the rock after he calls them rebels, everything indicates that Moses is angry with the people, even though they're not the ones who complained 39 years ago. You are the ungrateful children of those ungrateful people who caused my sister not to go into the land. My sister couldn't go into land because your fathers opened their mouth and they complained and they rebelled. And now my sister has died. And because you're suffering a little because you don't have water, you're rebelling against like your fathers did. Moses is angry. So one answer is Moses is not functioning as God's representative anymore. Who is Moses representing in his actions?
Himself.
Yeah, he's Moses for the first time is speaking on his own behalf. He's not God's prophet. God told him what to do. Moses is ignoring it. Moses is taking it personal. He's like a Corleone who forgot the basic rule. If it's not personal, it's business. God has told Moses, I'm not angry with the people. I'm not condemning them. I tell you to talk to the rock. Moses, you, for your own personal reasons, have taken it personally. And now you have corrupted my message. You have failed to have faith in the people, and therefore you're not going in. Okay. Anybody else want to talk about what Moses did wrong? Harvey and then Michael.
Well, I was just thinking that he referred to the people as rebels.
Mhm.
And in my mind, a rebel is a non-believer. So I think that was something he did wrong.
Very good. Their fathers, the generation before, were rebels. They were ready to turn back to Egypt to appoint new leaders. Moses is taking out on the children his anger at their fathers. Their fathers, Harvey, were rebels, right? Why did the Lord
Yes.
do this to us? Let's return to Egypt. We don't want you to be our leader anymore. Their fathers were rebels. Moses is now blaming the people. What are the people doing? These are a new generation. They're suddenly facing thirst. They say, Moses, why are we going to die here of thirst? God is not angry at them. Their request is not an unreasonable request. Why should we die of thirst? Why did you bring us out here to die of thirst? Moses regards them as the rebellious children of their rebellious parents, right? So he calls them rebels. Okay, Michael?
Oh, so I wanted to kind of change the topic, and if you don't
Oh, go
mind,
ahead.
I was just wondering. So I get what Moses did wrong. Moses did a few things wrong. What did Aaron do wrong? He
All right.
he went to find out what God did, and then he went back with Moses, and
All
Moses
right.
said we, but Aaron's just standing there.
All right. All right. So you say to me, look, Miriam dies. It's not even necessarily a punishment. Miriam dies. Moses, who had taken the people out, who should have been given the privilege of bringing the people into the land of Israel, Moses is angry, and we can understand he doesn't do what God wants him to do. He fails as a leader. So Moses is punished. But Michael is saying, what the heck did Aaron do? Go back to Aaron. You guys are always upset before that Aaron seems to be getting away with murder here. When Aaron built a golden calf, some of you said, why isn't Aaron punished for building a golden calf? When Miriam, Moses' sister, speaks Lashon Hara, speaks slander against Moses, who's she talking with? Aaron, her brother. Miriam is punished, but Aaron gets by. Aaron seems to get by in previous times. But now you're saying, well, wait a second. This time, Aaron didn't do anything. Aaron didn't call them rebels. Aaron didn't take the staff and hit the rock. Aaron didn't do anything. Why should Aaron be punished? So the question now is, all right, so we know why Moses was punished. He loses faith in his people. And when, by the way, you lose faith in your people, when you call them rebels and when you completely have lost all confidence in their ability to do what they're supposed to do, you're not the leader anymore. By the way, any of you are leaders. If you lose confidence in the group that you're leading, resign your position and retire, okay? You cannot be the leader of a group you've given up on. If you give up on them, just retire and leave, because you are not worthy to be their leader anymore. But what about Aaron? Why should Aaron be caught up in this? Anybody want to suggest to me why Aaron gets punished too? Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, let's say that Aaron knows his younger brother could be a little hothead. In the
Okay.
past, Aaron has spoken for Moses. So I suppose Aaron could have said, oh, my brother's really going to lose it. Maybe I better help him out with the staff here. And, how about that?
What Jerry is saying is it's not what Aaron did, it's what Aaron did not do. You guys already know, you all know that Moses and Aaron are two very different personality types. Aaron tries to keep the peace. He tries to keep things from breaking out into struggle. He makes compromises to maintain the peace. Moses is the hothead. Moses, when he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Hebrew slave, Moses kills the taskmaster. Moses responds viscerally. Moses gets angry when injustice is done. But Aaron, his brother, is the compromiser. Aaron, his brother, is the peacemaker. What did Aaron do in this instance? You're right, Jerry. He knew his brother. He knew his brother was passionate. He saw his brother get angry before. He was standing right there with Moses. He had heard with Moses what God said to Moses. Go to the rock, take the staff, speak to the rock, bring forth water, let the people have water for themselves and their cattle. And when Moses gets up there and he says, you rebels, you deserve to have water brought forth from you, and then strikes the rock, Aaron doesn't open his mouth. Okay. You would think this is the time that Aaron might at least say, Moses, calm down. You know, this is not what God told you to do. Therefore, why does Aaron get punished? What is his guilt? Go ahead, Gail.
Most rabbis and sages and Jewish thinkers say that there are many reasons, and you enumerated several of them. And one concerning Aaron, I understand. The one concerning Moses, I don't quite understand. Aaron is finally being punished, according to what I've read. He's finally being punished for the golden calf. Moses is being punished, in addition to what you said, for the issue of the spies. Which I don't totally understand that, because as I remember, he went to God and God told him, okay, send spies. So I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Everybody who dies in the story deserves to die for one reason or another, Gail is saying. Miriam, even though she probably died just because she was old, she died, if you want to say, what did she do wrong? She spoke slander about her brother at a period of rebellion. She fed the rebellion by speaking slander about her brother, saying, why does God only make him leader? Aaron, you can say, got what he deserved, because Gail says, okay, maybe Aaron in this instance didn't do anything wrong. He didn't participate in what Moses was doing here. But Aaron previously had caused the people to go astray by agreeing to make the golden calf for them. So kind of like this is delayed punishment. Aaron is being punished for the fact that he got away 2 times already. He wasn't punished for the golden calf, Gail is saying, and he wasn't punished when he listened to the slander that his sister Miriam was speaking about Moses. So Gail says, I can understand why Miriam was punished. And I can understand why Aaron was punished. At least there's something I can point to say, this is what they did, that they got, this, if they weren't punished beforehand, even though he didn't do anything, he's getting punished now. But Gail's point is, why should Moses be punished? That's the point that's giving you trouble, right, Gail?
No. I understand some of the reasons about striking the rock and saying, should we water? But the suggestion that they both are getting delayed punishment, and what is said by all these thinkers is that the golden calf, as far as Aaron is concerned, and that for Moses it has to do with sending the spies. And I don't quite equate that the same way, because he went to God and he got permission.
I think the fallacy is the belief that, and to go back to Rabbi Harold Kushner, death is not necessarily a judgment by God. Death is something that happens. The fact that Miriam dies is not necessarily a punishment. She had no right to believe that she was going to live much more. She was older than Moses was when he died. The fact that Aaron died, he was older than Moses was too, is not a punishment. There are some people who say Moses didn't die, Gail, because of a punishment either. That Moses, yes, he did say he called the people rebels. He didn't do what God said. He hits the rock instead of speaks to it. He's angry. He's not representing God. It's making it look like he and Aaron are performing. There are lots of reasons you could say Moses deserves it. But let's turn to an alternate theory. This will conclude with this. Maybe Moses didn't deserve it either. So now I'm going to ask you the big question. If you don't say that Miriam died because she deserved it, and you don't say that Aaron died because he deserved it, even though he was a leader of the Jewish people, and even though he didn't rebel, he had done something earlier in his life. Moses, you say, maybe he didn't do anything wrong, but now he did something wrong. But what if none of them were punished? Maybe this was not really a punishment at all. not for a sin. Maybe it was a punishment in the sense that they couldn't go into the land, but why wouldn't God let them into the land? Assuming it was not for a sin that they committed, why would God not let them go into the land? Leslie?
I don't know for sure, but they fulfilled their mission. God had said to begin with, they were wandering around, so a generation was gone, and all three of them had fulfilled their mission at that point. And they were old, and it was time.
Right.
I mean,
Okay. Your assignment, Mr. Phelps, if you choose to accept this mission, is to do that.
Right.
Mission accomplished, guys. Mission accomplished. I said to Moses, I'm giving you a mission. I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell Pharaoh to let my people go. They belong to me. Tell Pharaoh he hasn't got the right to the people. Tell Pharaoh I want him to release the people. Moses, that's your mission. Moses goes in and performs this mission. Aaron's mission is to be the Kohen, to bring the people closer to God. Everybody has their mission. What Leslie is saying is their mission is fulfilled. Is that what you're saying, Leslie?
Yeah, and we know at this point where Moses's head is, and if he's prepared and God has prepared them, then it's let the children go. And you're not part. He was not part of that. That was it.
Yeah, maybe Moses wouldn't have fit in anyway. Here's the thing.
He wouldn't have fit.
Yeah, but we think that Moses didn't get in because God says, okay, because he struck the rock, you and Aaron, and you did that. That's my justification for not letting you in. Maybe God had no intention of letting them in to begin with. Maybe what God is saying is, Moses and Aaron, you're part of the old generation. When you dealt with the Jewish people with a stick and hitting things, that's the way you deal with kids. When a kid doesn't do something, you give them a shot. You push them in the tuchus. That's not the way you deal with mature people. That's not the way you deal with adults. You can't deal with this new generation like they're still children. Moses, your period of leadership is over because you failed to understand that this people is now different. The mission has changed. And Moses, it's not your mission anymore. Your mission is over. I think, Leslie, you're on to something. Anybody else want to add to that? Or go ahead, Jerry, and then Lori.
Rabbi, could it also be the positioning, the timing here of this red heifer and the cleansing of those associated with dead corpses, death and dying? Could it also be by extension the fact that Moses and Aaron were both witnesses for the death of that generation of Israelites, and this is their responsibility?
Yeah. If I'm a leader, Jerry, and my job is to lead the people out and to bring them to the land, and essentially all the men of the generation are now dead, and I brought them to the very border of the land, my mission is really over. Yes, they have witnessed all these things, and now the time has come. They have seen the end of that generation. And God is merely saying to Moses, Moses, here's something you better learn. Not every person who I designated as the messenger gets to see the end of the project. You want to know the hard lesson? As a leader, it doesn't guarantee you're going to see the end of your project, okay? When you take on a responsibility, when you're given a responsibility, sometimes you die before you've fulfilled your task. What God is telling us, all of us, is that sometimes leaders don't live to see the final results of their work. It doesn't mean that they're punished. It just means they don't see it. Someone else was raising a hand. Yes, go ahead, Lori.
It's sort of like, I'm a baby boomer and my son is a millennial, and there is like, we don't see eye to eye on anything anymore. And I know it's a generation gap, and I think that sort of happened with them, that a whole new generation comes up, they think differently, they have different goals, and it's not the same as Moses and Aaron and Miriam. And you're right, they were done. It was their time.
Yeah. And that's it. You're right. A different generation, or that's an excellent way to describe it. Moses and Aaron and Miriam were leaders for their generation, but most of that generation, at least almost all the males, were gone now. Some of the women were going to still be alive. The kids, people who were under 20, which meant they were minors at the time, they're going to get to go in, the children who were born since then. But Moses, Aaron, Miriam, the generation that you took into slavery, they're gone. Your mission is over. Your task is done. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know it sounds unfair that you don't get to go into the land. Yes, it would have been nice if they'd gone into the land 40 years earlier. You could have all gone in together, but for whatever reason, you suffered because the people did not agree to go in. They rebelled. And therefore, though I have nothing against Miriam, despite the fact that she may have done some things that were not quite right, and though I have nothing really against Aaron, despite the fact that he may have done things, they might have been able to go into the land, but now none of you, not Aaron, not Miriam, and not you, Moses, are going into the land. None of you will lead this people in the next stage of their life. A new leader has to be appointed for a new task. As they go in to conquer the land, your task is over. You, Moses, were their teacher. You taught them. You were their rabbi for 40 years in the wilderness. Now your rabbinate is over. You're done. It's time for a new rabbi, a new leader to take over and to bring the people into the land and to conquer the land. And it was merely the fact that Moses, by what he did, shows that he had already lost faith. Moses, by the end of his life, was no longer the idealistic person he was. Moses, at the end of his life, had already become cynical. He viewed that new generation as rebels. He called them rebels. When he was angry at them, he cast on them the guilt of their parents. Moses was clearly not the leader for them anymore. So we were going to start new. Now the end has come. Go ahead, Harvey.
Well, in Judaism, a boy has a bar mitzvah and he becomes a man at 13.
Correct.
It seems like the cutoff during these years was 20.
That is correct. 20 was the cutoff. Harvey points out that in Judaism, the age of majority we think is 13. That is the case today, but it's not traditionally the case. Harvey, do you know the age at which a man became eligible to go into the Jewish army and count in the census? You know what it was in biblical times?
No, I don't.
20.
Oh, 20.
Before you were 20, you did not count in the census. You were not counted. Before 20, you did not go into the army. The age of maturity, the age of majority, the age of adulthood began at 20. This wasn't an arbitrary date. God says anybody who was younger than 20, when the rebellion occurred, they're not going to be held accountable for what these previous generation did. They're going to go in. They're going to be able to continue on. But those who are over 20, in other words, over the age when you become responsible, they're all held accountable. Only Joshua and Caleb will go in. All the rest will die. So that's the difference. Whereas 13 is the age now, Harvey, at that age, it was 20. Okay. Gail? Yep, go ahead.
So question, exactly why Joshua and Caleb? I mean, I know what they did on
How old were they?
positive reason.
Joshua and Caleb
had to be
were older than 40. All right. So
Oh, they were.
yeah, they were older than 40. And as a matter of fact, when God first condemns the generation, if you go back to the last Torah portion, when God condemns the people, he says, those who were 20 years of age or older, when you left Egypt, they shall all die out in the wilderness, except for Joshua and Caleb. So the question you're asking, Gail, is why were Joshua and Caleb accepted? Why did, of the old generation, were those two allowed to go on? And it's a great question, and there are good answers for it, but they were the two exceptions. Joshua and Caleb were the only men over 20 at the time of the rebellion who were permitted to go in. Every other man, including Moses, including Aaron, including all the other generation, if you were 20 at the time of the rebellion, at the time of the Great Rebellion, you were gone. You were done for. No one else qualified. But for very good reasons that we will speak about next time, Aaron and Caleb were granted the exception. And they went in and they took a very prominent role in the conquest that was to follow. But all the rest were gone. Anybody else?
Yes, Robert Siegel. Robert
Yes.
House.
Yeah, go ahead, Sonia.
I think the only instructions that they received, the people as they entering Israel, the Holy Land, it was to continue reading of the Torah and keep the generations continue with the
All right.
study of Torah.
Sonia is saying, has Moses really completed his task? Does he have nothing left to say to the people? Not quite, Sonia. We're going to see that there are still some months left or some time left where Moses has one final, he gets a farewell address. He gets a final attempt to a chance to address the people. We call that final address, Sonia, the book of Deuteronomy. The whole last book of the Bible is actually a speech that Moses gives, okay? The whole final book of the Bible is Moses's final words in the last 3 months of his life. It's his last message to the Jewish people. So Moses isn't finished yet. He is told by God, you're not going in. You won't get to see the land. You're going to be like Martin Luther King. I'm going to take you up to the mountain and you're going to see the land from afar, but you're not going in, Moses. You know, you'll get to see the land. You'll get to see where your children, where the people you led will go, but you're not getting in. You will die in the wilderness. But Moses still will have, Sonia, he's not done talking yet, okay? It sounds like there's nothing more for the people to learn. The book of Deuteronomy is still for them to learn. They still have something more that Moses has to tell them. So they're not quite ready to go in yet.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. Now, the end of the story has been written. What more is there to say? The generation has died out. Miriam has died. Aaron, and by the way, Aaron dies in this week's portion. If you think that Aaron doesn't die, at the end of the portion, we are told that Aaron dies. We are told at the very end of the portion that they come, let's see here, they come to a mountain and Aaron is told to go up to the mountain. And he, like Moses goes up to a mountain at the end of his life, Aaron is brought up to the end of a mountain. His high priestly garments are taken off of him. They're put on his son. They're put on Eleazar. And then Aaron dies at the top of the mountain. So you will read, if you can read the rest of this portion here, you read about Aaron's death. You read about how he goes up to the top of the mountain, how he dies at the command of the Lord, how the people mourn for him, and then we pass on. So Aaron will die in this portion. Miriam dies in this portion. Moses doesn't have more than about 3 months to live. Go ahead, Joseph.
When I read about Miriam, it was clear that was just a natural old age death. When I read about Aaron, it seemed like there was more mystery. I wondered if it was just a natural death or was it a supernatural taking of the life?
Yeah, I suspect, since Aaron was older than Moses too, and since nobody after Moses' time never lived to 120, 120 is considered a perfect old age. If you lived to 120, you made it to Moses' time. Aaron and Miriam were already older than Moses when they died. I think you can say that I don't see this as punishment. Aaron, Miriam, and Moses were they died. That was the end. Moses dies right before the people are ready to go into the land. Moses lasts right up to the end. But once Moses dies, within a couple of weeks, within a month's period of time, the people have entered into the land of Israel. So not long after Moses, the last of them dies, the people go into the land. I don't see it as punishment. If you want to know the truth, this is the way it works. Each generation has its leaders. And when the time comes, the leaders die. There's a rabbinic saying, Dor, Dor, V'dor, Shav. Each generation has its leaders. Each generation has its continuers. When one generation has finished their task, they leave the scene, a new generation comes on. We're just getting a shifting of characters. Moses is not prophet anymore. No, Moses is not leader anymore. Joshua is now leader. Aaron is not the Kohen Gadol, the high priest anymore. His son Eleazar becomes high priest. Miriam, the last of the family, the other last of the family members, none of them go on. They all die. They're already go. Howard, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, Aaron's death was very ceremonial. more than any of the others. I mean, he actually took off his garbs and turned them over to his son, and the end.
Actually, Aaron, he sees his successor. You're right, Howard. He not only removes his garb and gives it to his son, he knows that his son is going to take his place.
Yeah.
So Aaron has this wonderful, wonderful knowledge. He will die, but his son, who will go into the land, will continue on. His
Right.
son will continue to live on. His son will take over his position.
You know, it's very ceremonial.
Very ceremonial. In a sense, you can say Aaron says, look, my time has come.
I passed the mantle.
I'm passing the mantle.
Yeah.
Moses has one bitter problem. Aaron is replaced by his son. Guess who Moses is replaced by? Not his sons. He has two sons. We're going to have to deal next week with, even though God told Moses he had to die, why didn't God give to Moses what he gave to Aaron? He allowed Aaron's son to continue the tradition. Moses' sons, Howard, were not even allowed to continue the tradition. Moses was not only told, not only are you not going in, but your children, your two children who you raised, they're not worthy to be leaders of the Jewish people either. So that's the kind of the insult as well. Not only won't Moses go in, his children won't merit being leaders. Moses says to God, God, all right, next week we'll see this. You said I can't go in, all right, but who's going to lead the people in? Who are you going to have take over my responsibility? Moses intimates, maybe my children can go. God says, no, it won't be your children who will take over from you. It will be the man who served you as your assistant, as your associate, as your disciple, all of your life. It's not that being a prophet, being a leader is not inherited by descent. It's inherited by the quality of character. The man who will follow you, Moses, will be the man who served you all his life. It will be Joshua. Joshua will go in instead. So in a sense, you're right, Howard. Aaron dies ceremonially, seeing his position taken by his son. The priesthood always is by generations. It's always inherited. But Moses won't even have that. Moses as a prophet won't even see his own sons follow him. Okay, we've spent a long time. I realize this is an hour and a half, and we did a lot. We picked up from where we were. We explained the story of, we explained why the red heifer occurs, because we're dealing in this chapter with the end of the generation. Death is the natural topic from now until the end. Death is now present. One of the lessons as a leader that I've learned is very few leaders are able to see the end of their work. You have to at a certain point, especially when you retire or if you die in the saddle, as they say, you have to know that someone else will continue the work after you. No leader is irreplaceable. There is no such thing as an irreplaceable leader. Everybody can be replaced. It's true in work in general, but it's true of rabbis as well. As essential as you think a rabbi is, as magnetic a personality as he may have, as talented as he may be, no rabbi will ever see the completion of the work. We will leave it unfinished. And that's just the nature of the rabbinate. We leave the job undone. If we're lucky, we get to see from a distance the promised land. But that's the most we get. One of the lessons of leadership is leaders have to realize that leadership is only temporary. God only makes you a leader for a short time, and you must give it back, okay? One of the lessons we will term at the end is, one of the lessons we learn from leaders is no leader ever completes the task. A leader only serves for as long as he can be useful, for as long as he has purpose, for as long as he can still do what he has to do. But when a leader loses that ability or loses that opportunity, his period of leadership is over. So in answer to the question, Aaron isn't punished. Miriam isn't punished, even though they did some things that were wrong. Yeah, but God forgave them. They just got old. They just got too old. Aaron and Moses and Miriam were the oldest people of the leaders, and that whole generation was now dead and the leaders died with them. Okay, so next week we have to deal with another question. It looks as if everything is okay. The Jewish people are right there. They're right on the edge of the land. They're ready to go in. It looks like now we're finally going to go in, when suddenly something happens unexpected. A king of one of the kingdoms in the area says, the Jewish people are mighty and they're strong and they're going to take over. I've got to stop them. I'm going to stop them. I'm going to stop them. If I can't stop them with my armies, if I can't stop them by fighting them, I'm going to curse them. I'm going to get the biggest seer, the biggest prophet, the biggest non-Jewish magician I know, and I'm going to hire this magician and I'm going to bring him in, and he is going to do what no one has been able to do. He will curse the Jewish people, and because of his curse, I and the rest of the nations that live in fear of the Israelite army, we're going to be victorious. We can't stop them by natural means, but if we get someone to curse the Jewish people for us, we'll defeat them that way. We've got to turn God against the Jewish people. So next week we are going to read about the attempt to curse the Jewish people. The king's name who attempts to do it is a man named Balak. And what does he attempt to do? He attempts to hire a seer, a sorcerer, whatever you want to call him. He attempts to hire the greatest man of that age, the greatest non-Jewish man of the age, Balaam. And he says to Balaam, the Jewish people are coming up close. They are approaching my land. They are approaching the promise that God had given them. I need you to come and curse them for me to stop them. We've got to put an end to this. And he will send messengers, as you will see next week, to Balaam. And he will say, I will give you anything you want, money, riches, fame, you name it. Whatever you desire, I will give you everything if you do me this one favor. Place a curse upon the Jewish people so that finally this nation that has defeated Egypt and every other adversary up until now, that we can finally defeat them. Balaam will go to do exactly that. You'll see what happens next week as we come to the last part of the story, a last ditch attempt, a Hail Mary. Balak says to Balaam, you've got to come now. You've got to stop the people, curse the people for me, and let's put an end to this. So you'll see next week what happens. Okay? All right, everybody, thank you. I'm going to just stop the recording. Here, let me hit the stop recording button.